Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 106 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, I'll be discussing Orson Scott Card's classic novel Ender's Game with D.E. Whitcower, editor of the book Ender's Game and Philosophy, and Ashley Shue, who wrote an essay for the book. But first up, we've got an interview with Karl Schroeder, one of the best authors in the current generation of hard science fiction writers. He's also an accomplished futurist who works in strategic foresight for the design firm Idea Couture. His latest novel, Lockstep, presents a fresh take on the idea of human civilization in space. And now, here's our interview with Karl Schroeder. All right, so we're here with Karl Schroeder. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks.
All right, so your new novel is called Lockstep, and it has one of the most interesting science fictional premises I've heard in a long time, this idea of the locksteps. And I want to get to that in just a second. But first, I want to just talk about the setting of the book, because this book is set in interstellar space, in the several light years worth of space between our solar system and Alpha Centauri. And I think most people would imagine that there's not much there, but in your novel, there's a lot there. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a couple of years ago, I stumbled across a astronomy paper. I believe it was called Nomads of the Galaxy, talking about some observations that had been made using microlensing techniques, which is basically looking at stars winking because something passed in front of them. Very, very distant in the galaxy. But what the people doing the study were finding was that the number of winks was extremely high. And what this implied was that there could be up to 100,000 free-floating planets for every star in the galaxy. And by free-floating, I mean interstellar wanderers, nomads, orphan worlds. Most of them would be really tiny, like the size of Pluto or even much smaller. But a few would be Earth size or even bigger. And if every star in the galaxy has this retinue of sort of dark angels following it around, then wow, that was a fantastic setting. And I had to do something with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you tell us what kind of technologies would it take for people to live on these small planets just out in the middle of interstellar space? How would we get our food and water and energy and so on?
Well, this is where it gets fun, because when you first think of colonizing Pluto or places beyond that, it seems like a bleak and horrible thing to do. You're going basically to the back of beyond, further than the back of beyond, to a place where our sun is no brighter than any other star in the sky. And it's absolute zero outside. You're on a tiny ice ball, which is, too big to be called a comet, but too small to be called a planet. What are you going to do there? How are you possibly going to live? The solution is the kind of solution that actually has evolved here on Earth. If you ever get the chance to go up to the high Arctic, to the tundra, you'll find in the summer these tiny little Arctic wildflowers, which look so incredibly delicate. But they've survived in that incredibly harsh environment for millions of years. We had a little bit of a taste of their winter this winter in North America. And it's amazing that they could do it. But they use a very simple and straightforward trick. They are dormant most of the time. There's a very brief Arctic summer. And during that brief flowering, these plants and the animals that live off them undergo a burst of growth, and they exploit that energy as quickly as they can, as much as they can, and then they go dormant again. And I took that as a great sort of model to follow, and designed the civilization of the locksteps around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the civilization of the locksteps relies very heavily on going dormant in these hibernation beds that you call cicada beds. Why don't you tell us about that technology and why are they called cicada beds?
Well, first of all, I'd kind of like to say why I would go this kind of crazy route, rather than just writing a book in which, people skip between the stars faster than light. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because Star Wars, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, these are great stories. They only suffer from one problem. They're all impossible. As far as we know, Einstein laid down or discovered a rule that's ironclad across the cosmos. You cannot travel faster than light. If you cannot travel faster than light, then all of these stories become fantasies. People have tried to figure out ways to, accelerate starships up to close to light speed, and you basically have to take enough energy to blow up a planet to do something like that. It's crazy. It's actually ridiculous to even try. But there is another way, and it involves hibernation. It involves cold sleep. And it turns out that is although we don't know how to do it right now, a much easier problem to solve than the problem of faster than light travel, or even near light speed travel. There might, in the end, be a way to travel faster than light, but there's probably only one way. But there's probably many different routes to achieving hibernation technology that would actually work.
Mm-hmm. And so why'd you decide to call them cicada beds?
Well, because the civilization itself works a lot like cicadas do. They as a species, have evolved to all wake simultaneously, essentially, for their brief mating period. This is because any male who wakes outside of the cycle, simply won't find a mate. So they've over however long, millions of years maybe, they've developed a system whereby they wake and sleep in lockstep. And the cicadas all come alive at the same time. They have this brief flowering, like those Arctic flowers I mentioned, and then the next generation comes along. The cicada beds in lockstep they're literally beds. They're the same beds you sleep on, any other night. But on one night out of every month, they quietly, after you've gone to sleep, set you into deep hibernation. And eventually, in most of the lockstep worlds, they freeze you solid. And you stay that way for 30 years. And so does everyone else. The entire civilization goes dormant for 30 years and then wakes for a month. And goes to sleep for 30 years and wakes for a month. Which is, of course, insane. There's no rational reason why you would do something like that in a place like Earth. But when you get out between the stars to these nomad worlds, all of a sudden becomes not just a viable way to live, but perhaps the best way to live. Because in that brief flowering, you can use up all of the resources that your robots and mechanized industries have been slowly gathering and building over the last 30 years. You can have a party for a month. Go to sleep, wake up the next day, and party for another month. And it doesn't matter what size of world you're on. The smallest comet and the largest planet can participate equally in this civilization. But even better, you can travel. You can go to any one of thousands of worlds. If it takes you 30 years to get there at some slow sublight speed, it doesn't matter, because it feels to you and to everyone else as if it's overnight. And the beauty of this system is that it actually might be possible. Unlike any of the other space operas essentially out there that require some form of faster than light travel or hand-waving technology that magically makes the distances of interstellar space go away. This model takes them into account. It requires one thing. It requires hibernation technology way beyond what we've got right now. But what it requires isn't impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting. You said that, speaking of faster than light travel, you say that I misjudged the fervor with which people cling to the belief that the light speed limit will just somehow magically and hand-wavingly get engineered around. I mean,
Yes.
what have been some of the most vociferous kinds of responses like that you've gotten?
Outrage, really. No, of course we can do this. Of course faster than light travel will be invented. And shame on you for saying that it won't. It's all very well to say that it could be invented. And in fact, I will freely admit that we don't know that it can't be invented. You can't prove that faster than light travel will never be invented. But you also can't prove that Santa Claus doesn't exist. There's all kinds of things out there that you can't prove don't exist. But that really does us no good. And you can spend the rest of your life dreaming and wishing that faster than light travel could be invented. And I think we should certainly try to find out whether it can be. Or you can actually get the same thing, the same result as you would get from faster than light travel by other means.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, what are some of the potential drawbacks or practical problems with the lockstep system that you've heard from readers, and what would be your responses to those?
Well, first of all, it's crazy because the end result, as the hero of the novel Toby finds out, is that 40 years of lifespan for a person living in the lockstep encompasses 14,000 years of real time. And on the lit worlds, places like Earth and Mars, civilizations rise and fall, transhuman entities come into being, rip through the universe, devouring everything in sight, and there are wars, and there are collapses, and there are rebirths. And all the while, out in the darkness, the locksteps are just chugging slowly forward. And why would you go to these places rather than go to the exciting worlds where things are happening, is one objection. The answer to that is that you can travel. You can travel to thousands and thousands of different worlds if you live in the lockstep. If you don't live in the lockstep and you're stuck in real time, there's probably 10 planets that you might be able to visit in your lifetime. Or if you do travel between the stars, it's a one-way journey, either for you or for the people that you leave behind, who will be dead before you get home. Another objection is that clearly the locksteps are going to be vulnerable while they're asleep. Those 30-year spans are, perfect opportunities for raiders to come in and steal all your stuff. And that's true, but it's only the human beings who have to sleep in the lockstep. Their defenses can be awake, or at least alert, ready to be awakened at all times. Another objection is that economically, obviously any planet that runs in real time will outperform a lockstep like the 30 years and 1 month one by a factor of 360 to 1. And that might be true, but any world that operates like that will also be using its resources at a rate that's 360 times faster than a lockstep. And more importantly, any world that's running in real time will have far fewer trading partners per lifetime, if you will, per lifetime of its citizen than a lockstep. If you live in a lockstep, you can get trading goods from worlds that are light years away, from thousands of different planets, and you can trade with all of those planets. Subjectively, for you, it seems as if you send away for something, buy something that's made a light year away, and it arrives a month from now. If you're living in the lit worlds, if you're living in real time, all of these things take much longer. Your number of trading partners is smaller. You live in a much more impoverished civilization, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the protagonist, Toby. Do you just want to say a bit about the characters and the plot of the book?
Yeah, everything I've said so far sounds very complicated and kind of abstract. The story itself is kind of a family drama, as a matter of fact, and it all circles around Toby McGonagall, who's just coming of age when his family pulls up their roots and moves past the edge of the solar system to homestead on the microplanet Sedna. They do this because everything in the solar system is owned by the trillionaires. There's no possibility for any wealth to be appropriated by anyone else anymore. So they want to escape. They want a homestead in a place where they could actually make something for themselves. It's kind of a desperate gamble. And while Toby's taking a journey between Sedna and one of the nearby comets, an accident occurs, and he has to go into cold sleep to ride it out because his life support's failing. And when he awakes, he discovers that he's awoken to a completely different world because so much time has passed. And rather than cold emptiness in interstellar space, he's surrounded by the Lockstep Empire, which is the oldest civilization known to man, all of a sudden. And worse than that, he appears to be some kind of messiah for some kind of major religion in this civilization that he knows absolutely nothing about. And even worse, or even stranger than that, his younger brother and his younger sister are still alive. And for some reason, they're gunning for him. So the book explores, well, it follows Toby as he tries to find out what the heck is going on, and also evade his inexplicably murderous siblings as they come after him.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one detail I really liked is that when Toby first wakes up, somebody talks to him and their voice sounds strange because they're in an atmosphere that has more argon in the air.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that?
Sure. The planet is Lowdown. It's the name of it, and it's got argon and neon in the atmosphere, which you can get on these trans-Plutonian objects. It's been hypothesized that Pluto has a larger neon atmosphere. So one of the things the locals do is they pump oxygen into it. You can certainly breathe that mixture, although you tend to get intoxicated if there's too much argon. Got to keep the balance right. But one of the things they do is they use the sky as a giant neon light and light their cities that way. So it's an incredible place of bizarre environments. Another world has cities under the ice in a European kind of environment of global ocean under an ice cap. And another one is a literal cloud civilization of aerostats, 2-mile wide spheres with life support inside them, floating in the sky of a super Earth. So there's nothing like Earth out there, but there's things that are really cool and places that have thrived using the lockstep method.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Europa-like world you mentioned, I thought it was really interesting. You describe how it has water toward the core, and the gravitational force actually compresses the water the deeper you get into a substance harder than steel.
Yeah. Yes, you don't want to go down too far in that world. You certainly don't want to drown. They'll never find you. But there's that, and there's, of course, the impossible cold that you have to deal with. But what happens is that during these brief month-long flowerings, the people in the lockstep extravagantly use their energies to turn their back on all these harsh conditions and create Earth-like or exotic but wonderful environments for themselves. And to them, That's their whole life. They live that way all the time. So it's not a bleak and cold place for them at all.
Mm-hmm. Another idea I really liked was this idea that Toby's been in suspended animation for 12,000 years, and so that means that there's been 12,000 years for new diseases to develop that he might be susceptible to.
Yeah. There's been civilizations risen and fallen, languages, cultures, religions come and gone. But because the lockstep's always there, it's developed into a kind of backup for humanity and for human civilization. So, some catastrophe will happen, rogue AIs become godlike and devour everything, or human civilizations fight wars and blow up each other's planets, and everyone gets knocked back to the Stone Age. And then the lockstep wakes up. They look around and say, oh, it happened again. And they send their people in and they rebuild the civilization. And over, tens of thousands of years, this happens repeatedly. And they're always there to pick up the pieces. So they literally do a backup and restore on human civilization repeatedly. One of the reasons they can do this is because, of course, they're so insignificant as far as everyone else is concerned. They are in suspended animation nearly all the time, and they're in the places no one wants to go to, these little worlds between the stars. So no one has any incentive to go after them.
Mm. Well, yeah, and then another interesting implication of that is that the newest immigrants to the lockstep civilizations have the longest cultural histories.
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around that one, and I wish, in retrospect, that I had spent more time on this idea in the novel. I might have to write another book just to follow this thread. But yeah, the people who started the lockstep, for them, only 40 years have passed, which is why Toby's brother and sister are still around. But for people who are joining the lockstep now, who are recent immigrants, it's been around for over 10,000 years. It is literally the oldest, most stable culture that they know. And it's woven into all of the myths and stories that they know going back into the mists of time. So they are the ones who are most familiar with the lockstep. And this paradox is something, wow, you could play with it for ages. So, it's a fun concept, and one that I sort of came across fairly late in the creative process, because, of course, I was dealing with so many of the other implications as I went along. The other possibilities. It's quite possible that there's, other implications that are equally cool and bizarre that we just haven't thought of yet.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, do you have specific plans to write any more fiction set in this universe?
Well, I do have some ideas. There's ways to turn this around. You can look at this civilization from within lockstep time, or you can look at it from real time. And stories can be told from both points of view. And intersections can happen as well. I do have a short story set in the universe called Jubilee, which you can download right now from, it's a Tor Books original. It's available on from, say, Kobo or Amazon. It's like $1, $2 download. That explores some of the real-time civilization implications of having a lockstep around if you live on a planet. So there's many possibilities yet in this world.
Yeah, and I guess people can also read the story for free on Tor.com right now. At least that's what I did.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a terrific story. I mean, it's basically, it's told from the point of view of, as you say, people who live in real time, and there's this kind of Romeo and Juliet. Oh, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the story?
Sure. It's really a pretty banal story of young love in some ways. It's two kids who meet and fall in love and exchange letters. But the thing is that they live in different locksteps. One lockstep could have a sleep to wake ratio of 360 to 1, so 360 months asleep, 1 month awake. Another lockstep could have another ratio, let's say 270 months asleep, 1 month awake. This boy and this girl are from two locksteps that go in and out of phase with one another. In other words, they're both awake at the same time only once every 900 years of real time. And in order to be able to courier their letters between them, they have to use the people who live in real time, who see both of the civilizations whenever they awake. So they send their letters through a hereditary courier system, basically. And the story is of the last set of letters exchanged between them and of the courier who delivers them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was so interesting to me because it's almost like you have this legend, this famous story of young love like Romeo and Juliet that everybody knows, that's existed for thousands of years, but then it's still going on at the same time too. So it's almost like these ultimate kind of fans get to meet and interact with Romeo and Juliet in a way.
Yeah, and there's, if you just start to think about it, all kinds of other stories that can be recast in the same way. I mean, Sleeping Beauty is the obvious one. But I made myself a list one day of myths and legends that fit perfectly into the lockstep universe, and there's a whole bunch of them. So I'm very pleased because in a way it's like having discovered something, and now I get to explore it. But also, the readers get to explore it, and the writers get to explore it. Now that the idea is out there, anybody can write a story set in a universe like this. Nobody owns these ideas. So I'm curious to see what other people might do with the concept.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to what extent are there precursors to this idea in science fiction that you're familiar with?
There are a lot. A lot of people have done similar things over the years. There's really no new ideas. We all borrow and steal from each other. So I'm not going to claim some kind of tremendous originality here. What lockstep is a synthesis of different ideas that people like everyone from Fred Pohl to Greg Egan have played with at one time or another. There's lots of explorations of hibernation and its implications that have been done, and of near light speed and of deep space civilizations. The trick here is really only, or the innovation is really only, the synchronization of the cicada beds and the lockstep concept itself. The rest, it's, as I say, very well developed by many other writers over the years.
Mm-hmm. Some people I saw online mentioned Philip Jose Farmer's, I think it's called the Day World stories, where it's a much more modest thing, but the idea basically is that Earth is overpopulated, and so there's only, say, enough apartments for 1/6 of the population. So, 80% of the population at any given time is in hibernation, and
right.
then you wake up one day a week or something and share the same apartment with 6 other people who you never meet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I haven't read those stories, but it doesn't surprise me. It never surprises me when I come up with an idea and I get really excited about it, and then I find out that somebody else did it, potentially 40 years ago. It's fine. That is another thing that you can do with the lockstep. In fact, in the novel, we encounter planets where there are multiple locksteps that are out of phase with one another, and they share the resources of the world exactly as they do in Farmer's story. But as I say, nothing is truly new. I'm not surprised that other people have done it before. The thing is to not say, oh, it's been done before, and not try and do something new with it. all these ideas are playgrounds for us all to try and extend and see what new things we can come up with. And that's all I've done with Lockstep.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned that most of the labor in this universe is done by robots, and there was some really interesting economics in the novel. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I encountered a problem, and I've encountered this with most of my books actually, which Frank Herbert encountered when he was writing Dune, which of course is that he wanted to have a particular kind of civilization, but that civilization would be essentially ridiculous or impossible if artificial intelligence and robots existed. So he, in the case of Dune, used the Butlerian Jihad, this holy war to destroy artificial intelligences. Basically, a political reason why there would not be AI in that particular universe. I did something sort of similar with the technology in Lockstep. It was going to be a world much like the world that Toby had known. In other words, his brother and sister don't change much, even though technology advances, spectacularly quickly around them. They just basically draw a line in the sand and say, okay, if you're going to live here, you can live this way. But the robot economy itself is essentially based on Rome. Rather than having hundreds of slaves, each person in the Lockstep has a number of robots. It's illegal for corporations to own robots. They can only own single-purpose machines. Only an individual can own robots. So what people do is they send their robots out as a workforce, essentially as their slaves, to do the work for them, and they reap the profits. Except that what happens in the novel is that some people subcontract to some of the robots, saves wear and tear on the robots.
Mm-hmm. Well, in our society right now, we're having an increasing problem of technology rendering labor obsolete. Do you think that this idea of banning corporations from owning robots has any sort of analog to something we might try today?
Well, maybe. We have this thing, certainly in the U.S., there's this legal concept of the corporation as a legal individual, which always struck me as a kind of dodgy concept. If a corporation can be a legal individual, then why not other things that are not strictly abstract entities, like, say, ecosystems, rivers, mountains? There's a lot of flex and play in what we can consider to be a person and what we consider can own things. And actually, a lot of this is going to be highlighted very strongly in the next few years as Bitcoin and the things that you can do with the Bitcoin protocol start to hit the mainstream. Because you can create structures like virtual nations and virtual corporations on the Bitcoin blockchain. So far from being abstract, issues like this are actually going to become concrete real fast for us.
But in terms of labor, I mean, I'll say actually, I saw I went to a lecture recently by Jaron Lanier. He wrote a book called Who Owns the Future, and his solution to this problem of technology making labor obsolete was something along the lines of micropayments for any time you did something useful on the internet. Right. I've also heard, like in Switzerland, they're experimenting with just a certain guaranteed minimum income for everybody. So it doesn't matter if technology renders all labor obsolete, everyone's still provided for in a sense.
A guaranteed minimum wage is kind of a no-brainer. We've experimented with it both in the U.S. and up here in Canada, and the experiments, the Canadian experiments, were quite successful. if you don't have a structure like that, eventually you get to a situation where no, you don't need the workforce at all, but then you also don't have any consumers. You have no one to buy the products that you're making if they don't have some source of income. So either you jack up corporate taxes and feed that back to people as a guaranteed minimum income, or you find out some other way of continuing the circulation of wealth through society so that it actually produces more wealth. Otherwise, it just gets concentrated. There's a kind of singularity event, and and that's it.
I actually saw you say on Twitter, you said this conversation has me wondering about leapfrogging guaranteed basic income via guaranteed ownership of certain assets.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one thing I floated out there. Another idea that I've been exploring over the last few days is the idea of a smart currency, a self-redistributing currency. In other words, it's a Bitcoin-like currency that looks around itself in the wallet and says, "Oh, there's a million other of me here. It's too crowded in here. I'm going to leave." If there gets to be too much concentration of wealth, the currency itself, not any kind of legislature or any kind of body or any kind of human power structure, but the currency itself redistributes a small fraction of itself into empty wallets on a random basis. You can do this with the kinds of smart currencies that are made possible by Bitcoin. So, that's another example of a possible way to approach the problem. And I'm sure there are many others. You can attach these ideas to various ideologies, and in fact, that's what you find with the various altcoins that are being created around the Bitcoin protocol right now. People are creating altcoins which represent one or some other political ideology or economic ideology. But you can also just approach this as a pragmatic problem, a problem in systems design, if you will, that in the end, the solution might end up appearing to be capitalist, socialist, something else that we don't even have never even imagined before. But the point is to think of imaginative ways to solve the problem.
I saw recently Charles Stross had an essay that unfortunately I didn't get a chance to really read, but he was basically arguing, from what I gathered, that Bitcoin was going to be a catastrophe. Did you see that? Yeah,
I'm aware of the essay, and my interest is not in Bitcoin as a currency, despite what I've just said. Bitcoin is the first throw of a completely new game. And regardless of the deficiencies of Bitcoin itself, the protocols that lie behind it are the important thing. And the problems that have been solved in creating it are far more important than the details of Bitcoin itself. There are issues of trust, societal trust, of law, of governance in general, that have been solved in the creation of Bitcoin. And so for me, Bitcoin itself is a distraction. It's taking us away from examining the deeper implications of what the blockchain technology is actually capable of.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, speaking of the law, there's a very interesting scene in Lockstep, a scene in a courtroom, that essentially seems to suggest that in the future, AIs will make juries and judges and lawyers all obsolete. Do you think that's where we're headed?
Well, we're headed there within about 6 months in terms of contract law. There's a project called the Ethereum project that is using the blockchain technology, again, the technology behind Bitcoin, not Bitcoin itself, to create smart contracts. And what you can do when you have a smart contract is the contract itself lives in the internet. It's fully distributed, decentralized, not controllable by any central authority. But you can build things like corporations out of it. You can essentially create the legal contractual structure of a corporation within the decentralized blockchain, and it is a kind of automaton. It will follow the rules that have been laid down for it to the letter. It will never cheat. You can open source it, so everyone can see the code and everyone can see exactly what it does on the blockchain. It will never cheat. It will always follow the rules, and it will function as the architecture, if you will, of a company. That is 2014.
Wow.
So if I'm claiming in lockstep that at some point legal apparatus might be replaced by computerized systems, I'm only barely avoiding being out of date.
I think another really interesting thing in the book is some of the politics involved. I mean, on one world that Toby visits, there's something called the Demarche model, where there's a woman who, by some statistical process, has been chosen to be a representative.
Yeah, there's a network protocol called promise theory, where basically the nodes in the network do not inherently trust one another. They make promises, and you build up the network according to who actually follows through on their promises. One of the things they found with creating networks in promise theory was that these networks tended to develop delegation as an emergent property. Certain nodes would be delegated authority by other nodes because it was simply cheaper in computing cycles. And the reason is that, let's flip this around to human beings. If you as a voter know somebody who always votes the way you vote, why not hand them your vote so you don't have to bother with the process? This is what delegation of authority actually is. And it's actually something you can model and build as a network process. So, thousands or millions of people vote exactly the same way as this one particular woman in the civilization in lockstep. So she is actually made into their delegate by the system itself. She's not voted in. She doesn't run a campaign. She's just designated as their representative because, she always votes the way they would vote.
Mm-hmm. I actually heard you say that in one of your earlier novels, you said that you came up with something like 4 different new political systems. Are there any other political ideas like that you've come up with that you're particularly want to share with people?
Oh, well, yeah, in my 2005 novel, Lady of Mazes, yes, I was inventing political systems left, right, and center, just because of the way I built the world. That's a novel that explores the idea that technology is legislation, that introducing a technology is functionally equivalent to legislating some change in society. And in Lady of Mazes, people have the legal right to determine what technologies will be allowed in their vicinity, shall we say, in their little slice of reality. Because if you don't have that right, if you can't control the technologies that operate around you, then you don't control part of the legislative landscape that controls your rights, essentially. So in the course of exploring that idea, I did have to, or I naturally came up with a bunch of different ways of governing. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, great. See, back in episode 62, I had my friend Tobias Bakel on the show to talk about ecology and science fiction. And in that episode, he said I had to ask you about your idea of thalians. And so I guess this is my chance. I think this is what you were alluding to earlier when you were talking about the personhood of mountains and streams and things like that. But could you elaborate on what you mean by thalians?
Yes, it's a kind of thorny problem. This came up in my first novel, Ventus. One of the questions I was trying to answer was, if you create an artificial intelligence that can think about the world and see problems and try and solve them on its own, is this your own hand in the puppet? Or is this something independent of you? Is this something different? In Ventus, a nanotech-based terraforming system fails to recognize the human colonists when they arrive on a planet and knocks them back into the Stone Age. And this system, which is an artificially intelligent distributed system that basically is woven through the entire ecosystem and controls the ecosystem, is essentially the representative of the trees and the plants and the grass and the animals and the birds. And because it has gone its own way, it develops its own perspective, essentially. And that is what I call salience. You could call it the awakening of nature. If you flip that back to current day and to the world we live in now, you can imagine giving a pod of whales a Bitcoin wallet and giving that same pod of whales a distributed autonomous corporation. The Bitcoin or Ethereum-based corporate structure I was talking about earlier, and having it sell its ecosystem services online. You could do the same with a watershed or a river. Already in several nations in South America, natural systems are recognized as having rights. This is not going to be too long before this becomes a pretty common way to view natural systems worldwide. Rights to nature is not so crazy an idea as you might think, because natural systems we're already realizing are participants in the economy anyway. We tend to call them externalities, but in fact, for instance, the wetlands around Toronto, what we call the Toronto Greenbelt, they purify and clean the water that flows down to Toronto and to Lake Ontario. To replace that service with water treatment plants would cost X number of $1 billion. So you can say that watershed, the Toronto or the Greenbelt, is worth or provides X $1 billion worth of ecosystem services. And if it already does that, why not give it its own corporation? Why not give it its own salience, essentially?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and these are all such interesting ideas and can't really be covered in too much depth in the time we have for this segment.
Well, I've written hundreds of thousands of books, and I haven't been able to cover them adequately either.
But so people should definitely check out your novels Ventus and Lady of Mazes. And are there other like websites or essays or things they should look into?
Well, you can certainly check out the stuff going on around Bitcoin, and so it would be projects like Ethereum. That would be ethereum.org. And many of the altcoins, like Nextcoin, which are using alternative approaches to solve the same problems as Bitcoin. But there's just so much out there, and so many interesting things going on around governance and economics. A kind of sudden explosion in this space that I don't think any of us anticipated. So a lot of fun to be had in following through on it.
Mm-hmm. And then another thing I really wanted to ask you about is you have a story in Neil Stephenson's Hieroglyph anthology.
Yeah.
Tell us about that story.
That story covers a lot of the ground that we've just been talking about. The Hieroglyph project is a brilliant idea from Neil Stephenson. A hieroglyph in his language is, well, take the rocket ship with fins, the classic image of the golden age space opera rocket ship. That's a hieroglyph. It encapsulates a whole vision of the future, essentially. And what Neil wants to do is deliberately try and invent the next hieroglyph. The idea, the image, the vision that will direct an entire generation of kids to become scientists and engineers and problem solvers. So he's brought a bunch of people together to write stories and try and craft hieroglyphs. And my story in that anthology is about governance. It's about, if you will, a governance singularity event. I will freely admit there will be no Facebook of governance. Governance and government are wicked problems. They are complex, multifaceted. They don't consist of just one problem, and there will never be just one solution. But the story admits this and shows how solutions from all kinds of different directions can converge in the very near future on a staggering new vision of how we govern ourselves.
On Twitter, you said that in this story you talk about a website where the only stance allowed is agreement. You can either agree or remain silent.
Yes. Why would you do that? Well, it's because right now the Internet is an argument machine. Internet forums are basically designed to cause people to have disagreements and fallout from one another. But they don't have to be. If you study the way that people reach agreement, one of the core issues is that people disagree because they don't share the same understanding of the meaning of words. In the story, the website is simply a place where you can define a term or define a concept and say, this is what I think it means. Other people can either agree with you about that or not. The community that grows up around shared agreements of the meaning of terms and concepts is a community that can solve problems together. Even if they don't agree on, their actual politics, the fact that they agree on what they're talking about in the first place means that they can actually move forward. What happens on the Internet all the time is that people get into arguments in these forums because they don't even know that the other guy is talking about something completely different using the same words. And that's just an example of one of the small problems that amplifies itself into making the world an ungovernable mess. But that's solvable. And if we did solve it using just a particular architecture of how our online forums work, then we might have a very disproportionate effect on how people cooperate.
All right, and then in addition to writing science fiction, you also do futurism, essentially, strategic foresight, and maybe just you work for this organization called Idea Couture. Maybe could you just talk about what you've been doing with them and what's coming up for you?
Sure. Idea Couture is a full-service consultancy, and our clients are some of the biggest companies in the world. We have offices all over the world. And I'm one of the futurists, essentially, working at the company. We explore strategic foresight, which is basically solving the problems that people haven't realized are problems yet. We don't try and predict the future. Anyone who says they can predict the future is either crazy or lying. What we do is look for the places where uncertainty lies, where there are critical uncertainties that might affect an organization or a business. And then we explore those with the client, find strategies and approaches that are resilient because you can imagine them working in a variety of different possible futures, and then help the client to implement those. It's one of the services of Idea Couture, which also has a unique approach to using anthropology and ethnography to explore business and consumer spaces. And it's just a very creative environment to work in. So I'm having a lot of fun there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, could you give maybe an example of one of the things you came up with that you're particularly proud of?
Well, actually, I'll give you an example, not from me, but from my associate, J.R. LaFontaine. We were talking about an idea I called forward warehousing, where if you have drone transport, you can create a value proposition such as 5 minutes or it's free. You can do that by distributing your warehoused goods throughout a city in small shipping containers. If you've got enough of them and drones to transport items very quickly, you can always be less than 5 minutes away from the customer. I thought this was kind of a cute idea, but JR took it one step further and said, well, why don't we add in the idea of the sharing economy to this? People are doing car sharing and all these things. Why not trunk sharing? So you have the how much space is unused in the trunk of your car at any one time? Most people probably, have almost nothing in their trunks. Well, why not use that as your distributed warehouse? So you have this vision of cars in parking lots spontaneously popping their trunks open and drones coming out and delivering anything from scotch to medicine to pizzas to people nearby. 5 minutes or it's free. And the people who own the cars getting a tiny cut of that as part of the sharing economy. Lots of fun. I have no idea whether it would ever be done, but I don't see any reason why it couldn't.
All right, great. So I guess just finally, do you have any other books coming out or projects you want to mention? I've just heard that a military foresight exercise I did about 5 years ago, Crisis in Earlia. I wrote a fictionalized scenario of a future military operation. That's being published now. I'm not sure that that's actually available to the general public, but it's quite a lot of fun. It was an interesting blend of science fiction and foresight. So I'm happy that that's coming out. And I do have a couple of secret projects that I can't talk about, unfortunately. So there's more stuff in the offing. But the next major thing, I think, coming down the pipeline will be the hieroglyph project, which is looking more and more exciting by the day. Mm-hmm. And I guess we could just say about that that other project, essentially the Canadian military hired you to fictionalize a scenario to make it more digestible to military personnel, right?
Yeah, it's not so much that, but that when you turn a set of concepts into fiction, you uncover all kinds of hidden assumptions. Simply by telling the story, you realize, well, that actually wouldn't work, would it? So telling a story by itself is an analytical tool. And I've done this twice now. The first time was a project called Crisis in Zephyra for the same group, the Canadian military. That was excerpted in Harper's Magazine a few years back. And this is essentially the sequel to that. I'm fascinated by the intersection of rigorous analysis and sort of loose storytelling, and how you can end up having a kind of rigorous storytelling come out of it. And so these projects are sort of dear to me, even though they might not be to more than a subset of the the rest of the world. But for me, they represent the place where science fiction meets reality, and the world can actually be changed by it.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. So, I mean, we could keep talking about this stuff all day, but unfortunately, I think we should wrap this up now. But I'm sure lots of people will want to go check out your books, including your latest book, Lockstep, which I highly recommend.
So that's going to be out on March the 25th. I'm going to be having a book launch here in Toronto at Bacca Books down on Harvard on the 29th at 3 o'clock. So anyone in the vicinity, just come on down.
All right, great. So we're going to wrap things up there. And Karl Schroeder, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Karl Schroeder for joining us on the show. And as I mentioned, our panel topic today will be Ender's Game and philosophy. And this panel will definitely involve spoilers for Ender's Game, so before listening, you might want to go read the book. And I'm joined today by two guest geeks. So first up, we've got D.E. Whitcower. He's an assistant professor of philosophy at Old Dominion University, whose work focuses on digital culture. He edited the books Ender's Game and Philosophy and Philip K. Dick and Philosophy, and has also written articles on Full Metal Alchemist, the iPod, and Occupy Wall Street. So Dylan, welcome to the show.
Great, thank you.
And also joining us today is Ashley Hsu. She's an assistant professor at Virginia Tech, whose work focuses on the uses of technology. She's written articles on nanotech and animals using tools, and also had an article in Ender's Game and Philosophy called Every Breath You Take, about the use of technology to monitor children. So Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and so we're going to start out and just talk a little bit about how we first encountered Ender's Game. And I'll start. It's pretty simple. My parents are both big science fiction fans, so I don't know, I was probably about 8 or 9, and they just handed it to me and told me to read it. And I just absolutely loved it. And I think if you're a nerdy kid who gets bullied and likes video games and stuff, Ender's Game just really connects with you in a really, really powerful way. So I just absolutely loved it. Throughout my teenage years, I probably read it over 20 times. I don't even know. And so that's basically me. And so Dylan, how did you first encounter Ender's Game?
I have no idea. I think I must have read it either in like 8th or 9th grade, around then. But I have no idea how I came across it. I bet I found it in my older brother's room. He was a fan of science fiction stuff, and was something of a taste guide for me. The stuff that he was into was generally good.
And did you really connect with the Ender's Game the way sort of were you bullied and a nerdy kid and stuff like that? And
I don't know, I guess, but I don't think that was really a strong connection for me with the book. I think for me it was just the sort of two senses of wonder that come from the book. The one sense of wonder from the battle room about like being able to think in this way, spatially and strategically, and managing coordinated activity in this very open, three-dimensional, creative space, and that was really exciting. And then the moral free play that comes from the terrible situation and where this leads Ender and everyone else.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to be talking about that today. But before we get to that, Ashley, how did you first encounter Ender's Game?
Well, I was older than you. I was 16 and had a summer Presbyterian regional mission trip thing in Puerto Rico. And another kid, I had already dabbled in Asimov, the gateway drug. And I was told by this other kid that I had to read Orson Scott Card, that it was going to change my life. That I could figure out the universe and love and how it all fit together. And I was told, in no short terms that the Bible wasn't going to, explain a lot of things to me that Orson Scott Card could, which is a weird thing to be told on a Presbyterian trip when you're just hanging out with some of your new friends. So I was told, and I immediately picked the books up and read the trilogy and then the quadrology, I guess. And I loved them. They were wonderful. And I didn't know about all of Orson Scott Card's religious weirdness at that point. I was just, and I didn't love Ender's Game the most. I loved Speaker for the Dead. The idea that, well, I guess I shouldn't get into that since this is about Ender's Game particularly, but Ender's Game was moving, but it was the later books that really stirred something exciting in me.
All right, cool. So let's talk about this book, Ender's Game and Philosophy. So Dylan, how did this book come about?
Well, I had written for this series before several times. This was my fifth book in this series. So I'm used to organizing these works on popular culture and philosophy. And when I heard for the first time that this movie was actually happening, that, finally it wasn't just vague rumors, but that a movie was going to finally happen from this book, I immediately said, okay, yeah, that's great. That will provide a market for us to produce this philosophical work on this book. And I already knew the relevant publisher and editor, so I just called them up and made a very brief pitch, and they said, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Let's do it.
And how did you go about lining up the contributors? Did you know who was an Ender's Game fan, or did you have to ask people? Or
yeah, the way that I usually do this, the way that we usually do these volumes in general, is we put out a call for proposals. So this goes out to various philosophy email listservs, and it's just a brief thing saying, hey, we're putting this book together. We want proposals. Proposals should look like this. Possible topics might include, and send them to us by this date.
So if there are any philosophers listening to this who might want to write for one of these books, what sort of listservs should they be following?
Yeah, probably the two main listservs are a sort of US-centric one, Phil Updates, and then a UK and Europe-centered one, Philos-L.
So everyone check those out. And so, Ashley, how did you get involved with this project?
Well, I've known Dylan for a while, and I've seen a couple of the other book projects he's done, and I saw on Phil Updates this being advertised. And I've never been tempted to do one of Dylan's popular culture books before, just because I wasn't as interested in the subject matter. But when I heard he was doing Ender's Game, I crapped myself. I was so excited. And it took a while to figure out what I wanted to do. But I think as soon as I had seen the email, within a day, I had already written up my proposal and had my fingers crossed. Just because I'm so interested in the subject matter, and Ender's Game provides so much for discussion that I knew the book would be great. And I know Dylan's a great editor, so he'd make us all sound good, even if we're not naturally good at writing for popular audiences.
And I mentioned in your introduction that your piece was about monitoring children. You want to just say a bit about how you came to that topic? I've always been struck by the monitors and how they're used to watch over Ender. And I'd recently read Ender's Shadow, which says more about the monitors and how the children are watched. And I have two small children myself, and we use, baby monitors to listen in on their conversations when they're upstairs. And it just struck me as something that could be like really sinister, even though I'm using it for good. So I wanted to sort of explore how this technology can be used for not such great things, even though we think of it in our daily lives as, being great. I can check up on my children, no problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talk in your article about your ambivalence about continuing to monitor your kids as they become teenagers and so on. And I feel like society has gotten more and more overprotective almost of kids, particularly as they get into adolescence. I saw this interesting article where it was like they showed a map of where the grandfather, these three generations had lived in the same town, and the grandfather was allowed to explore this area, and then the father was allowed to explore this much, much smaller area, and the son was essentially not allowed to leave his yard, right?
Yeah, no, it means childhood used to be, you go outside and play on your own with, your buddies that you meet hanging out in wherever you are, but more and more we're drawing perimeters, putting up fences, not letting our kids leave yards in the way we used to. And I mean, it certainly has been a huge shift, and we are monitoring them. I mean, studies show that we're spending more time with our kids, which I mean is good, right? We're spending more time with our kids, but at the same time, our kids are under our direct supervision for much longer times in their lives. And you get the whole phenomena of helicopter parenting that's become more of an issue. And I don't know, I feel like we should be deeply ambivalent, and that children do need privacy and an ability to do things outside of their parents' control. I hope this doesn't come back to bite me in the ass when my kids get older. I mean, I worry about this. I don't know that I have any good solutions for it, but I think Ender's Game gives us one, ultra monitored situation where things are absolutely, evil for the children.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I mentioned that one of the things that really captured my imagination as a kid was just the way that Ender's Game portrayed bullying. And the bullying, we really see it comes to a head when Ender at the beginning of the novel has his monitor removed, and suddenly the other kids who all dislike him know that the adults aren't watching him at all times anymore. And we have this scene where this Ender fights this bully Stilson and gets him on the ground, and it's essentially won the fight at that point and has the opportunity to walk away, but he chooses to just completely, beat this kid to death, but beat him, really, really badly when he's down, on the premise that this will prevent other kids from, that he'll scare the other kids so badly that they won't want to ever mess with him again.
Yeah, and that ethos goes, I mean, you see Ender using that reasoning over and over. He beats someone not just enough, but enough to annihilate, and it's why they use him. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But so, I mean, Dylan, what do you think of that scene? I mean, what do you think of both? Is this an effective strategy to get people not to mess with you? And is it an ethical strategy? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've mostly thought about this in terms of just war theory. So in terms of, I mean, we read this today, even though Card couldn't have possibly written it this way, of course, but we read this today in terms of the Bush Doctrine, that we need to voluntarily take on the position of the aggressor in order to forestall future confrontation. Because, obviously what he's doing here is he's moving beyond a proportional response to a conscientiously disproportional response as a deterrent. So, it's very consciously taking on the position not of self-defense, but as future self-defense against future non-actual and, possibly never to be actualized aggression, to engage in preemptive aggression. There are plenty of other historical precedents that we can turn to and that should come to mind here. Ones that, since in 1984 they were in fact in the past rather than the future, ones that it's much more likely Card was in fact thinking about. So things like the firebombing of Dresden, the just massive disproportional violence that we saw in World War II, of course with Hiroshima ultimately.
Dylan, do you think the commentary in Ender's Game is one to justify a lot of these things? Because, I mean, it seems like we're supposed to see Ender as a victim and as a pawn. And, right. I mean, most of the people who are reading this, I mean, even our host here talks about how he related to it. I mean, people who have been bullied. I mean, I certainly related to that aspect. And you kind of want to cheer for Ender at the same time he's doing these horrible things.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really problematic aspect of this. I mean, if we fall into that too quickly, then we end up in this situation where something like the Bush Doctrine, which is, very troubling, even if we want to accept it, it's very troubling, and it directly flies in the face of, maybe 1,500 years of just war theory. Now, with that said, there's so much else about the book that that drives us to question that. Of course, that it turns out to have been unnecessary. But that's ambiguous because, how would we have known that it was unnecessary? It's sort of like with the missing weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The claim was we can't let the smoking gun be a mushroom cloud. The outcome for not taking aggressive action right now is so severe that it justifies what otherwise is an illegal aggression.
Right. I mean, like in the book, you mentioned this philosopher Michael Walzer, who has this idea of the supreme emergency.
Uh-huh.
And it seems like the situation faced by the International Fleet in Ender's Game is like the ultimate supreme emergency, right? The entire existence of the human race is at risk in this conflict. And so in that context, like what, how much risk is acceptable when what's at stake is the existence of the human species, right? I mean, Ashley, what do you think about the way that the IF handles the bugger threat in Ender's Game?
I mean, I guess I reject a lot of what builds up in Ender's Game. I mean, people are defined in particular ways and they have to follow through given how they've been described. But if I were put in charge, I think I'd try to refuse to play like Ender did at one point until he was convinced by Valentine to go back. I would try to utterly deny any involvement in this and try to get away. In a way, Ender certainly does. I don't think Colonel Graff tries to get out of it. He just tries to do his job. But he's part of a military structure that pushes him in that way.
Because, I mean, it just seems to me that part of the big tragedy of Ender's Game is that many of the characters are acting in what they see as the best interests of humanity. But in the end, they end up doing this horrible, unnecessary, brutal war crime, sort of.
Yeah, well, part of what I enjoy about this book is it reveals how dirty consequentialism is, right? This book, everyone is a dirty consequentialist. The ends justify the means. We're all working towards this end. Even Valentine, the sweetest character in the book, gets enlisted by Colonel Graff. And it makes everyone's hands look dirty with this consequentialism that you only care about the ends. And when you only care about the ends, everything turns to shit.
I mean, Dylan, what do you think? Do you agree with that this shows up the downsides of consequentialism?
Yeah, certainly. And there's throughout, that consequentialist perspective is depicted as non-optional throughout. So like Ender's attempt to drop out, it's like, well, you can't just opt out of this situation that humanity is in. And so, it doesn't make sense just to say, well, I just prefer not to, do this stuff.
Everyone has to play. I mean, that's what's going on in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. And it actually reminds me a lot of, Immanuel Kant's discussion of just war theory in his essay Perpetual Peace. He outlines a series of rules that need to be followed if we're ever going to reach lasting international peace. He actually says standing armies need to be abolished if we're ever going to have peace. Because otherwise what will happen is we put together one standing army and then everyone around us says, well, they're peaceful, but what if they're not peaceful tomorrow? We need to be ready. So everyone ends up preparing for war, even though no one's interested in war. And then eventually someone needs to make the first strike, because if they don't, then if the other person decides that they're going to make the first strike, then they'll win. And so you have to make the first strike because someone else might actually just be interested in making the first strike because they think that you might someday be interested in making the first strike in case they happen to become aggressive at some point, which they're not. And so peaceful nations are forced into war.
Well, it seems like the buggers would have been safer if they had just dismantled their army, right? Like if there had been no bugger fleet and humanity had come to the bugger homeworld with never met any resistance and saw that they had no weapons, the whole situation would have been solved, right?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think, it's not just the humans who are at fault here. Not just in the misunderstanding of the first two invasions, but as you suggest, if the buggers really wanted to say, like, hey, we didn't know what was up, then they should have stood down.
Mm-hmm. Actually, speaking of Kant, I thought it was really interesting in the book that Kant imagined an alien race sort of like the buggers. That was news to me.
Yeah, from the anthropology. Yeah, it's a really weird thing. I mean, Kant, he wanted to try to talk about pure reason in a way that would be, just looking at what was logically necessary for pure reason. And that meant that whatever he said would have to apply to any being with reason. And that included non-human corporeal beings. It also included like angels. And it's hard to know exactly how much he was thinking about this in terms of like likelihood, whether it was aliens or angels thinking about like, hey, these things are probably out there, so I should talk about them. He was probably just saying these things are conceptually possible, so I need to talk about them.
Kant is still going to look at the individual as the source of reason, and I'm not sure that the buggers can be made sense of as individuals in the way Kant would have thought about it. I mean, because he's still thinking about individuals, whether they're humans, animals, angels, whatever. They are the source of reason, and those are the things that we have to look at. I mean, maybe the Queen would just count.
Yeah, I think certainly any sensible interpretation of this would have to say only the Queen counts, and we have to understand all the soldiers as just, disconnected parts of her body. That they're non-contiguous body parts, and that's kind of the end of it. Because, as you say, they don't have the capacity for reason, so they can't possibly count as persons for Kant.
Okay, cool. So I also wanted to talk about Valentine and Peter Wiggin. What do you guys think of Valentine's actions in the book? I mean, she's helping her brother, who's a sort of diagnosable sociopath, but then he ends up bringing about world peace and just, possibly presenting an all-out war. So is Valentine, I don't know, what do we think about her actions in the book?
Oh, I think she's the worst. I think, she's held up as this sort of moral paragon, the one person Ender can trust. And I feel like she betrays him in the book when she goes to the pond and convinces him to go back in. I mean, this is a little boy who she's not protecting. She's not the obvious sociopath like Peter is. But in some ways, because of what she does to Ender, I think she's about 1,000,000 times worse. I would call her the worst person in the book if I had to.
But I mean, given the information that she has, doesn't she think that Ender's actions are necessary to protect Earth?
She does. But I still think that there are duties to protect children that override a lot of that. I mean, she sent him back to battle school. She sent him back to everything that was stressing him out, that made him burn out. And she knows full well that sending him back means the stress on him, even if it means the benefit of the world. I mean, this is where consequentialism is dirty again.
But but we do have to consider the consequences at some level, right? I mean, otherwise, if we're gonna consider virtue ethics or something else instead, we would say like Valentine would want to act in a way. We would want Valentine to act in an admirable way, and that would be to act in the best interest of her beloved brother.
Mm-hmm.
But then, what are the consequences of that for the Earth? They could be very, very dire indeed, for all she knows.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. She's acting as a consequentialist as she ought to. I think in later books, Valentine acts much less like a consequentialist, and you see in the development of the series a move from a look at consequentialism to really an exploration of virtue ethics. Although now I got off of Ender's Game again and got into the other books, and I'm sorry about that. But it's hard for me to consider Valentine alone in this book.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan, do you think Valentine? I mean, there's a lot of bad people in this book. Do you think that Valentine is really the worst of them?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think probably I want to say Peter's the worst. Yeah, but I think there are very good reasons why we react in this way to Valentine. So Valentine is in very much the same position that Graf is, but and thinks about things in very much the same way, but we weight it differently because of her gender and because of the nature of the relationship that she has with Ender. The place that she's stuck is in between two kinds of ethical demands which are incompatible. And those are demands of justice and demands of care. She, due to her relationship, she has this particular obligation to look after her brother as her brother. That, their relationship dictates that she show favoritism towards him, and that there's really an ethical imperative to look after him and be in that relationship of special trust. And yet she's also thinking on a world political level, and capable of that, and in a position to actually do something on that level too. And so the demands of justice, which mean maybe sacrificing a child's moral character, not just making them miserable, but making them in fact kind of a bad person on purpose. That maybe that's worth it. Those moral hazards of the child soldier that Ender is made to suffer, that might be worth it. And so she's at this position of weighing care against justice. And at least from the perspective of justice, from traditional consequentialist and to some extent also duty-based moral theories, if you put care above the universal, if you put your particular commitments and your particular relationships above the greater good, that doesn't make you a good sister. That makes you a horrible person. That makes you selfish. I also wanted to say Graf is in the same kind of position because he really does love Ender. And he's also in a relationship of trust with Ender in this sort of teacher and proxy parent kind of relationship. But we let him off the hook much more than we let Valentine off the hook. One is that teacher relationship is much more attenuated, especially because it's in a military context where we expect commanders to do bad things, and to send people off to die and so on. That's not part of the normal brother-sister relationship, sending off your sibling to die. So that's one reason why we let him off the hook, even though he's in this same position of being at the crossroads of obligations of care, or relationship of care, and obligations of justice.
Well, so why do you think that Peter is the worst of the characters?
I think he's just the worst person. And in some sense, that's kind of not his fault. He kind of got a bad draw in terms of moral character. And what he does with that is actually really praiseworthy. It actually gets us into another weird issue in Kantian moral theory, where for Kant, what's morally praiseworthy is when you do the right thing because it's the right thing. And so somebody who is just all smiles and sweetness and light and like just instinctually stops to help others because that's what you do, it is actually not terribly morally praiseworthy. Somebody who's morally praiseworthy for Kant is somebody whose instincts are to be cruel and miserly and who cares for others because it's the right thing to do, rather than because it's just instinctual. Peter's instincts are the worst of anyone's, I think.
Mm-hmm. But it's kind of interesting because Peter's motives are the worst, but essentially the impact of his actions are the best. Whereas Ender's motives are the best, but the impact of his actions are the worst.
Yeah. So, I mean, in saying I think Peter is the worst person, at the same time, we might want to also call him really morally praiseworthy, because not just his consequences are the best, but what he does with his horrible moral instincts is really transformative of himself ultimately too. That he becomes a good leader, working from this terrible material. And then, Ender starts from really quite good material, and then it's just constantly perverted. So, like he wants to achieve peace, and he does that through disproportionate violence against kids.
I mean, Ashley, what do you think about this stuff we're saying about Ender and Peter? Do you
I agree that Peter starts out the worst, but he does. I mean, he's a self-transformation story where you don't get that nearly so much from the other characters except for Ender, where the transformation by the end of the book is so radical. I mean, Graf and Valentine are much more static because they have certain roles to fill in the book. But the contrast between Peter and Ender going opposite directions is one of the more interesting parts of Ender's Game.
Mm-hmm. I mean, another essay in the book that really made me think was there's one where it brings up the issue of so at the end of the book, Ender finds that he's wiped out the buggers, but one of them is still alive, this hive queen egg, and he preserves it. And this essay makes the point, Ender makes this decision that we think is probably the right decision, but he makes it without consulting anyone else. And does he have the right to decide on behalf of all of humanity to preserve this potentially very dangerous alien species?
I mean, all of humanity in some sense has betrayed Ender at this point. I don't think he has any reasonable way of thinking that what would happen to the Hive Queen would be anything except a sure and swift death. And I think this move, I mean, and you see it in the later books, is redemptive, that he can, resurrect this species at some point to sort of compensate for what he personally did to them. Even though he was a pawn in this scheme, he does take his role in it very seriously. And I think his concealing the bugger shows that he does not want to be a pawn anymore. I mean, his whole life, victim, pawn, bullied, naive, used. I don't think he has any other choice, but if he's going to be, a moral person in the end, is to take this thing, this bugger, the Hive Queen, and hope to do something with her someday. And I think he has to leave the rest of humanity out of the decision because he knows what they do. And he knows what they've done to him.
Mm-hmm. Is Ender right, do you think, to feel guilt over what he did to the buggers when he didn't know what he was doing?
Yes. I think he might realize that he was naive to not realize what was happening. If you read Ender's Shadow, which follows Bean, his battle school buddy, Bean knows full well what's happening. He walks through the walls. I hope I'm not giving anything for subsequent movies away. But he, is spying on the commanders, and he knows what they're setting him up for. And Bean knows what's happening at all times. And once you read Ender's Shadow, you think to yourself, how did Ender not realize what was happening with the way in which things were structured? All the final battle, everyone is present. Ender accepts what people tell him and his position in things on a regular basis in a way maybe he should feel ashamed of. Even though he's a child, and I feel bad even saying that in the first place. I mean, he has every right to be naive, and he is the victim, but at the same time, at some point, I mean, wouldn't the light turn on that these people are forcing me to a particular action in the way that they're shaping me. It isn't just, I'm going to be a really good commander. It's, all these games, they're leading to something. And, Bean realizes it, and Bean is just as smart as Ender. And I think you see some frustration on Bean's part, or maybe it's not frustration, but it's how can Ender, who we're just as smart as the other one, how can he not see what they're pushing him towards? Or maybe it's willful ignorance at some point. I don't know.
So we're running a little short on time here. So I guess just I want to ask you guys if there's anything else in the book that you just want to highlight a little bit, any essays that stand out in your minds or anything like that?
Well, of course, mine. Everyone should read just my essay. I don't know. I really enjoyed the chapter that was put together on questions of character, because of all the reasons we've discussed. The characters in this book have such interesting relationships to each other and change in such interesting ways over time that I felt that discussion was really good in the book.
Of course, I'm pleased with what I managed to put together for my chapter as well. Ashley, your chapter was great fun, and I'm also at the similar places and dynamics with monitoring and thinking about whether and to what extent I'm becoming a helicopter. With regard to my children, so that those details, of course, speak to me very personally as well. I don't know. I was very pleased with the diversity of different topics that we got in and the kinds of approaches to them. The discussion about Peter and Valentine, I think, is really interesting, and I'm so sad that those characters got so attenuated in the film. So, like Alex Halavay's chapter on blogs and Demosthenes and the history of demagoguery and anonymity. It's great stuff, and he's a new media scholar who I happen to know, and he mentioned that he was a fan of Ender's Game, and he saw my call, and it was like, write something about blogging. This is what you do. And I harassed him until he did.
Well, and that chapter is really interesting because it's written in the format of a back and forth debate between Locke and Demosthenes, the online personas of Peter and Valentine.
Yeah, and he sent that to me, and he's like, well, I don't know if this is what you wanted, but it is. And I was like, no, this is awesome. You don't need to worry. And then, we talked a bit about Peter, and there's a just fascinating chapter about Peter and Machiavelli, and sort of, in some sense, rehabilitating Peter, or I think it's more on that end rather than debasing Machiavelli. And I wasn't expecting, when I put together the call, that was something I just wasn't on my radar, and that came in, and I was like, that's really cool. It's a really nice direction to take with this. But one that I do want to specifically mention as well is the one on queer theory. And as the book was developing, this is something that was coming out in the news about Orson Scott Card, his really quite offensive views about homosexuality, which are, deeply at odds with the content of his writing. So, really disorienting to fans to be confronted by this intolerance.
Makes me so angry.
Yeah, and Ashley, I know you've got a very distinctive take on this that I want to be sure that you talk about, because you've got a great take on this. But yeah, that chapter I kind of commissioned part of the way through of editing. I contacted someone and said, "Hey, could you do something about queer theory?" Nick Michaud, one of the authors of that chapter. I contacted Nick and said, "Hey, could you do something on queer theory and Ender's Game?" And he was like, "That would be awesome. I want to do that." And it turned out just fabulous. It's a great chapter and points out really compelling stuff, showing that there's something weird going on with Card and with Card's writing and with Card's issues about this. I mean, as Michaud points out in there, he ends up sleeping in the same room as his older teacher as part of his training on on Eros. Like, that's where they are. They're on Eros, and they're staying in the same room. And it's there's some really weird. I mean, the shower fight scene, of course, is really there's a great deal of ambivalence going on about, young boys wrestling together, and after as Nick Michaud points out, again, I this is something I just hadn't seen, but there's this line that he found about how he would follow Bonzo's hips anywhere, and that's it's a really distinctive way to describe leadership. So that was really cool. The way that turned out, and it's great. But yeah, Ashley, you've got a particular take on Card and his intolerance.
Oh, I am made so angry in knowing about Card's hate. I wish I had never known any of that, because to me, Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead and the other books in the Enderverse, which is the Ender universe, which all you geeks probably already know that. Sorry. After reading these, I was really high on the idea that if you could love another that you don't know, that if you could know them, then you're forced to love them. So Ender gets to know the Hive Queen and can't help but love her and help her in her ends. I mean, Card has it all wrapped together. Love, hate, war, peace, reconciliation. The idea that if you know someone well enough and you understand their motives, which comes out in Speaker for the Dead, the idea of the Speaker for the Dead is if you can tell a person's life story as it happened, with all the horrible parts of it in as well, that you can understand them and you are forced to love that person. I mean, this is part of what makes up all of Orson Scott Card's novels in the Enderverse. The idea that knowledge is love. Forget this children at war stuff. The Ender books are about love and understanding and acceptance. And you can encounter something completely foreign to yourself, a true other, and once you understand it, the love is there. I mean, and that Orson Scott Card can be so hateful at all just makes no sense. If he reads his own books, I think he'll understand better what I mean here. And love is redemptive. I mean, it's redeeming the Hive Queen.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Orson Scott Card is a very controversial figure, and oftentimes, anytime his name comes up, a lot of passionate, commentary ensues. Have you seen any of that in regard to this book? Have you gotten any sort of what sort of reactions to it have you gotten?
Oh, I've had one of my friends tell me they would never read Orson Scott Card's works, or engage in any of this, and that I'm silly to put my name on something in this book because Orson Scott Card is such a hateful bigot. I think there has been a huge backlash. I mean, at least among people who would otherwise read and enjoy these books.
Yeah, I think I've really I've heard more moderate kind of claims, probably because, but as editor, I think maybe that would just appear more impolite for someone to talk to me about it in that way. But yeah, I mean, I've heard from several people saying, like, I was totally excited about this movie, and now that I know more about cards, suddenly, like, I can't go, I can't support him, sort of ever again. And of course, this book gets caught up in this, because people just want to say, like, I love what I got from that book, but I have to walk away now. I have to disengage. So I think the success of the book must get caught up in some of the boycott, but, having that discussion in there about, well, let's look seriously at what's going on actually in Ender's Game about homosexuality, and seeing that what's going on there is actually quite ambivalent. I think that that approach, and just sort of, meeting it head on, like, let's seriously look at what's going on in here about this. I think that helped to blunt any possible criticism of us as, perpetuating an anti-gay agenda. Even though, yeah, it's an unavoidable and troubling association. And incidentally, when I started the project, I had no idea about any of this either. As I think most of the fans didn't, until suddenly it was part of a potential blockbuster motion picture, and then this was everywhere. But when I started the book, no idea.
I mean, just quickly, what did you guys think of the movie?
I loved the movie. I thought they did. I mean, I'm always skeptical when I'm going into a book. I really like the new movie of it. And I thought they did a much better job than I expected. They stayed truer to the book. The battle room was awesome. And usually I'm not going into movies for special effects, but it was very cool. And it does help you think out some scenes in the book that for me were kind of hazy because of the flying around in the room. I thought that was very cool. I was really disappointed in the ending, of course, because it seems like if there is a sequel, it's going to look nothing like the sequel to Ender's Game, which would really be disappointing.
Yeah, and that was a sort of weird thing going in, that you can see how Ender's Game is positioned to be a huge blockbuster, and then the sequels to Ender's Game just aren't. Like, Speaker for the Dead would be a really great movie, but it would be very, very different.
It wouldn't be exciting.
It wouldn't appeal to the same audience.
Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, it's kind of an amazing thing that worked for so many fans of the novel to go on to the next and be like, hey, this is a totally different kind of story. Anyway, yeah, the film itself, I think they made good choices about how to fail, given that failure was inevitable, in the way that adaptations of books, this always happens. You need to leave out huge amounts of things. I was very sad to see Peter and Valentine's characters just become props. But I don't know, what else could have been cut. So that was disappointing, but okay, sure. I totally agree about the battle room. They did a great job with making the special effects make that real without having them take over, without having the special effects become the film. One thing that I don't have a good handle on is how the film worked for people who hadn't read the book. Because I read one review from somebody who mentioned that she hadn't read the book, and it was totally disorienting to me. This film critic who talked about, like, well, it's too bad that they didn't really develop the romantic interest, and and that was one part where Petro was taking him to show how to how to be a good sniper, how to use these freeze weapons effectively at long range and so on. And the way it was shot out in the theater was like, oh God. Like they couldn't resist taking the one possible opening for vague sexy times and like putting that in.
I was so worried they were going to kiss. My hands were digging into the seat. I was like, oh no, don't let them kiss. Don't let them kiss.
Yeah. And this
it would ruin it.
This critic was like, well, couldn't they have just, had a kiss in there somewhere? And it was so totally the opposite reaction that I guess we had both had. But, part of that is the way that they made the characters older, where the characters as they appear in the film, I'm approaching them through the book. So I'm still seeing them as like, well, keeping in the back of my mind, he's supposed to be 7 right here, even though obviously he isn't. Yeah. And so if they had filmed those characters embodied in this older way kissing, that would have been like deeply creepy for me in a way that it wasn't for someone who had never read the book. So yeah, I don't have much perspective on the film as a standalone thing. And that's kind of interesting on its own.
All right, great. So I promised to let Ashley go at 11, so we should start wrapping this up now. I guess do you guys have any other projects you're working on? Any upcoming books or papers or anything you want to mention?
I'm working on a book about non-human animal tool use and how we can make sense of it in our theories about technology. If that makes sense. So chimps who use tools, crows that use tools, how do we make sense of them given what we've said about technology? It seems like some of these things count. So yeah, it's a fun book.
Are you looking at all at sort of more instinctual, less creative problem-solving directed use, like trapdoor spiders and birds' nests and stuff like that?
Yes. So there's a whole bunch of literature on birds, but there's also things that are interesting about beaver dam building. And how if you play a tape recorder of rushing water in a place where there has been no rushing water, but there are beavers present, they'll fell a whole bunch of trees and put a whole bunch of stuff to muffle that sound. It seems like they're reacting to, the sound of rushing water where it's the loudest, of course, is where the stream is most narrow, and that's where they build their dams. So there's some interesting literature about beavers as well that I really enjoy. So I'm trying to look at the whole spectrum and not just the cases that we know are easy to deal with.
And then Dylan, what are you working on?
Yeah, I'm working in too many directions. I have a sort of sustained research program in developing philosophical theories about Facebook and social networking and our engagement with each other, our pursuit of relationships and ethical action on Facebook, the presence of politics on Facebook, especially as related to Occupy and other new social movements. So that's the sort of long-term thing that I've been working on. And in the meantime, I keep getting distracted by just fascinating stuff that I see. Like I'm working on something about bacon right now, trying to make sense of why bacon is such a prominent part of internet culture.
Francis or Roger?
Yeah, no. that would be the reasonable thing for a philosopher to be working on. But yeah, I actually just did an interview last Thursday with a reporter working on this topic, trying to tell the story of the rise of bacon in our culture today. It's a weird thing. I also have a similar project on internet cats. So yeah, I'm trying to organize a workshop in October that I'm co-organizing. I would be co-facilitating to try to put together a research program among a group of scholars who are interested in this. Because right now, doing some background lit review stuff, there's so little done on the theory of cats online and sort of cuteness online in general that it looks like I may in fact be the leading scholar on this right now with my mere 2 publications on the topic. This is just, it's not happening. And it needs to. This is important. This is significant and strange and calls for our explanation.
And I mentioned that you, in the bio, that you have a book called Philip K. Dick and Philosophy as well.
Right.
Do you have other stuff that's so directly relevant to science fiction fans?
Not at this time. I hope at some point to be doing some work with Lovecraft.
That would be cool.
Yeah, of course not science fiction, but obviously same kind of fan base. But yeah, not at this moment otherwise, and no direct plans right now for Lovecraft. I've sort of a long-term scheme about where to place that and how to organize that.
All right, cool. Well, I would read it.
Yeah,
if that helps.
Sure. Everything helps. Yeah.
Just keep me posted on the cats.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we're going to wrap things up there. So, Ashley, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, David.
And Dylan, thanks for joining us.
Great, thanks very much.
And, of course, big thanks again to Karl Schroeder for being our guest today. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including Geek Guy 77. And also a very special thank you to all of our crowdfunders, including our newest supporter Jan Juntunen, crowdfunder number 70. To learn more, visit our website at geeksguideshow.com and click on crowdfunding. I also just got an email from listener Sean Cobry that I thought maybe I should answer on the air, because other people may be wondering about this too. So Sean writes, quote, "If I'm a representative sample of the public, then everybody loves your show and has adequate disposable income to appropriately subsidize it. About a dozen episodes ago, you talked about a potential crowdfunding project. I have been waiting to contribute so I could help maximize your momentum when that happens. Since it has been a little while without further mention, I wanted to check in and see if third-party crowdfunding is still going to happen. Your podcast is my favorite serial media, and I hope you can keep it going for a long time." So big thanks to Sean for that note. We definitely appreciate the sentiment. Here's part of what I wrote in response. I said, quote, "I was planning to launch the Kickstarter sometime around now, but I just haven't gotten around to it. Mostly I've just been too busy working on the podcast itself to put any more work into the Kickstarter. I also thought it might be a good idea to see how much I like hosting the show by myself before I commit to an entire year of it, and also give listeners a fair chance to see if they still like the show with me as the main host before they contribute money to it. I've also been trying to see if I could come up with some interesting angle for the Kickstarter that might make it more exciting and noteworthy than just give us money to keep the show going. But I haven't really come up with anything, so maybe I should just bite the bullet and go for it. Anyway, you'll definitely hear about it if we launch the Kickstarter, and the show is definitely not going to just suddenly disappear one day without giving you a chance to contribute funds to keep it going. So no worries there. So yeah, that's where things stand with the Kickstarter, so just everyone stay tuned for more on that. All right, so that was our show. So thanks to everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.